This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 44 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, here to ask the questions that you may have while listening to our podcast. We are both here because we believe that the more you know, the better prepared you are to make difficult end-of-life decisions for yourself or others.
So please relax and get yourself something delightfully wicked to snack and sip on. And thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me as we talk about why do we fear death. In the first half, we have Charlie mixing pina coladas and getting lost in the rain and reporting on found bodies in the Notre Dame renovation. And in the second half...
What a pairing. There we are, folks.
Yes. It's like wine and cheese.
Both with both of them, it's a little stiff with both of them. All right, go on, Marianne. What else?
That was bad. In the second half, we explore why we fear death. And in our third half, we welcome back Claire Lucky, a millennial widow known on Instagram as the Grieving Bitch. She joins us to talk about her views about death since the death of her own husband, Matt. Hey, Charlie, you know what I've been watching? You do? How do you know?
I guess it's a simple yes or no. I'm going to have to go with no.
Have you been following me? There's this documentary about Paul Newman and John Woodward called The Last Movie Stars. Have you seen it?
I have not. I don't have a TV.
Oh. You've got a computer. You can watch it on your computer.
I can watch my computer?
You can watch your computer on it.
I can.
Computer.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
No, but yeah. I've heard it's very detailed, that it's very good.
Paul Newman and John Woodward recorded audio tapes.
Right. Yeah.
And had interviews with co-stars and movie directors and all these different people because they wanted to write, I don't know if they were going to write an autobiography or I don't know what their exact plan was. I don't remember. But then before Paul Newman died, he destroyed the audio tapes.
Yeah.
But then, as kids were cleaning, they found that they had been transcribed.
Right. Yep.
And so they got all kinds of different stars, like George Clooney reads, oops, my earbud just fell on my ear. Just a minute.
Oh, no, not that.
So they had like George Clooney reading
Newman's
the text for Newman, and lots of clips from the films and lots of looking at their relationship and then them as people. Oh my God, it was wonderful.
You know, I almost ran into Mr. Newman and Ms. Woodward in Connecticut many years ago.
I actually did run into the two of them at theater out in Western Massachusetts. Oh. And it can't have been all that long before he died. He was very thin and my impression was he was very white. He was dressed in white. His hair was white and his face was white and he was very, very thin, but his eyes were still blue.
Those blue eyes. Yeah. Him and Sinatra. Yeah.
Oh my God, but what a handsome man.
Yes.
Young. And then as he got older, he was like, God, as I'm watching this documentary, he's like, Jesus, he never did lose it until I guess when I saw him. I don't know I don't know how long before his death that was, but what a handsome man.
Yes.
And I never knew she had Alzheimer's. Did you know that?
It started a little before he died. I think like less than a year before he died. She had the first of Alzheimer's. Yeah.
So, and her mother had Alzheimer's, and she'd done a film about Alzheimer's where she played a woman with Alzheimer's like many years before that. So, anyway, fascinating lives.
Yeah.
What a way to live.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
So
what's up with you?
Well, nothing new. It's hot here again in the city. You know, the concrete jungle is just hot. So you know what would?
Well, we haven't had a day under 100 in like over a month.
Jeez, I thought it was. So there's nothing in sight. There's no relief in sight.
Not that I've heard about. It was 100 and something yesterday. It's going to be, and then the other day it was like 78% humidity on top of it. And it's like, what did we ever do to you, whoever controls the weather? I think it was what's his name who held a snowball in his hand and and said,
"Well, look,
what's all this fuss about global warming?" And Mother Nature said, "Let me explain it to you."
You need an answer to that question? Yeah, here I got an answer for that. Jeez. Well, then, you know what? It would seem that something to cool you off would be a pina colada. So
and some rain.
If you like pina coladas and taking walks in the rain, well, first, may I recommend a bourbon and burgers? But for the purpose of this episode, your next funeral lunch may be more uplifting if you brought a gallon of original recipe pina coladas to share with the other mourners. The pina colada originated in Puerto Rico. The name Puerto Rico means strained pineapple in Spanish. And for extra points, it also means rich port. I don't mean the wine, I mean like a port of entry. The fruity pina colada has inspired much debate about its exact origin and how to make it. The first theory involves a pirate, Roberto Cofresi, who supposedly invented the drink to keep his sailors happy and prevent mutiny.
There's a good reason.
Well, it would prevent me from mutiny. Others swear it came from the bar at the old San Juan restaurant, Barrachina. But it is most likely that the original cocktail was invented in San Juan in 1954 by bartender Ramon Monchito Marrero. The Caribe Hilton, one of the premier luxury hotels in the Puerto Rican capital of San Juan, claims the pina colada was first served up in its Beachcombers bar after hotel management asked Marrero to create a signature drink that captured the flavors of the island. Marrero reportedly spent 3 months experimenting with hundreds of combinations before perfecting his concoction of rum, cream of coconut, and pineapple juice. Gosh, I would have liked to have been his lab assistant. After tasting one of the hotel's pina coladas, Hollywood legend Joan Crawford reportedly declared it was better than slapping Betty Davis in the face. You know, these two girls just never seem to get along. According to the Caribe Hilton, Marrero mixed up and served his creation at the hotel for 35 years until his retirement in 1989. And folks,
that's a lot of pina coladas.
That's a lot of pina colada. And folks, remember to drink responsibly. You don't want that drink spilling on your dashboard. Speaking of spending months to uncover something new, did you hear that while repairing Notre Dame, workers discovered a sealed sarcophagus? The lead sarcophagus had buckled from the weight of the church above it, but was still sealed in a cathedral which caught fire in 2019. The sarcophagus was buried below the central nave, you know, around your belly button, where crews were digging footing holes for the scaffolding needed to reconstruct the cathedral's roof and spire that collapsed during the 2019 fire. Hey, I rhymed. Archaeologists also unearthed painted sculptures, including a bust of an unidentified bearded man and parts of original 13th century ornate partition that separates the altar from the nave. The excavation site was under a layer of stones that date back to the 18th century, but beneath that were levels that dated to the 13th century, reports Reuters. Viewed through a tiny endoscopic camera, The body inside the sarcophagus appears to be perfectly mummified, and archaeologists believe it was likely a senior dignitary buried in the 14th century, about 100 years after the construction of the cathedral. You can glimpse pieces of fabric, hair, and a pillow of leaves on top of the head, a well-known phenomenon when religious leaders were buried, says Christophe Besnier. The fact that these plant elements are still inside means the body is in a very good state of conservation. So, please go to our webpage for the recipe on how to stay stewed for 600 years. Conserved. And if you can't find that, look for the recipe on pina coladas and additional resources for this program on our webpage. We hope you will follow us, not home, but on Facebook and Instagram, and remember to rate and review this podcast. We have a link in our show notes that makes rating our podcast easy, and that would be so helpful to us. As a licensed nonprofit organization, we are dependent on your kindness and always appreciate your tax-deductible donations. If you find this podcast to be of help to you, and as many of you have, please go to our webpage to donate so that we can continue to provide quality shows about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement at www.everyonedies.org. That's dies.org. Marianne?
Thanks for that, Charlie. So, Charlie, we always say everyone dies, and It's a fact of life that many people are afraid to think about. But when we ask them what makes them so fearful, they typically find it hard to put it into words. After all, we all exist, so how do we imagine not existing? It's likely that we all have some level of fear of death, whether it be the thought of our own death or the fear that someone we love might die. Thinking about death is really not a pleasant one, and many of us choose to focus on what life has to offer, as well as our own wishes and goals, instead of thinking about death. And people will say, I prefer to focus on something, more positive. Well, since death is a given, how about we talk a little bit about that fear of death and maybe overcoming that a bit. So, what is it that we fear about death? Here's 7 fears that I found. 1, I can no longer have any experiences. 2, I'm uncertain as to what might happen to me if there is a life after death. 3, I'm afraid of what might happen to my body after death. Well, if that's a fear, there's some choices you can make as to what's going to happen to your body. So there's that. 4, I could no longer care for my dependents. And, that's true. You're not there emotionally, but hopefully, if it's our kids, we've done a good job of raising them so that, we're kind of living within them and helping them as they go through and making their choices. 5, my death would cause grief to my relatives and friends. Yeah, okay, that's I can see that. 6, all my plans and projects would come to an end.
Yeah, there is that.
So, there is that, which kind of sounds good because then I could cross everything off my to-do list and actually not have anything else added. I think that sounds kind of cool. And 7, the process of death might be painful. And that's true, it might be. But again, with good preparation and
absolutely,
and talking to people about what you want and
better living through chemistry.
Availing yourself of palliative care and hospice care. It doesn't have to be. It might be. It could be an accident or something like that. But, it doesn't have to be. So trying to understand the fear of death takes us first to Freud, who thought that we cannot truly believe in death as a real occurrence. So any death-related fears must stem from an unaddressed childhood trauma. Of course, what else?
Of course, it's Freud, so yeah.
Yeah. And Charlie, I have a lot of that, especially related to my mother cutting my bangs. But the fear of death is a nearly universal fear. Mm-hmm. Fear self-preservation is common to all species, but the awareness of one's own mortality is only known in human beings. This awareness presents a difficult problem for humans, how to manage the terror that accompanies the knowledge that everyone dies. Anthropologist Ernest Becker wrote The Denial of Death, which was published just before his death from cancer, and addressed the understanding of death anxiety and its causes. Becker believed that death anxiety comes naturally to all people, and the fear of death comes from 4 causes. First is that the world is terrifying, and, can't argue there. Second is the basic motivation for human behavior in our biological need to control our basic anxiety and deny the terror of death. He thought that all humans are naturally anxious because we are all helpless and abandoned in a world where we know we're going to die. The third aspect is that the terror of death is so overwhelming we conspire to keep it unconscious. It's what he calls the vital lie of character, which protects us from the painful awareness of our helplessness. And if we all join in this conspiracy of silence, not even calling death by its name, we feel safe and can pretend that the world is manageable. Except that it isn't, and everyone dies. The fourth aspect is our need for legacy, or what he calls a hero system that allows us to believe that we can overcome death by participating in something of lasting worth. We can have immorality if we leave something of value behind: a family, money, write a book, create an empire, have a podcast. That is why, he argued, everything everyone does, the goals we set, our passions and hobbies, and the activities that we engage in, is in essence a coping strategy. And these are the things that we focus on so we need not worry about our eventual death. Becker's thoughts led to the development of something that's called terror management theory, which explains a variety of human behaviors, such as intolerance to others, by relating these behaviors to the basic motivation to protect oneself against mortality awareness. According to terror management theory, self-esteem is the key element for understanding the degree to which individuals experience death anxiety. People with high self-esteem are better at managing fear of death, while people with low self-esteem are more easily intimidated by death-related situations. More recently, the concept of post-traumatic growth has been presented to understand death anxiety. Post-traumatic growth is the experience of positive change that occurs because of the struggle with highly challenging life crises. It's manifested in a variety of ways, including an increased appreciation for life in general, more meaningful interpersonal relationships, an increased sense of personal strength, changed priorities, and a richer factual and spiritual life. The idea that great good can come from great suffering is ancient. The model for understanding the process of post-traumatic growth, in which individual characteristics, support, and discovery are threatened or taken away by the traumatic events, play an important role. It's also suggested that post-traumatic growth mutually interacts with life wisdom and the development of the life story, and that is the ongoing process, not a fixed outcome. According to post-traumatic growth, going through a distressing event, such as the death of a loved one or receiving disturbing health diagnosis, can have a positive effect, causing individuals to appreciate the small things in life a lot more or to become more goal-oriented. Becker's approach to dealing with our fear of dying is to practice dying by looking at death in the eye and discovering new possibilities of choice and action and new forms of courage and endurance. We can choose to keep our fear and our despair about our mortality or grow to a place of acceptance. The hope is, in Becker's word, is the disguise of panic that makes us live in ugliness and not the natural animal wallowing. And this means that evil itself is amenable to critical analysis and conceivably to the sway of reason. So how can we deal with our own death anxiety? When people ask me for my advice, I tell them to learn all they can about the subject, because knowledge is power. Using For example, our Everyone Dies podcast, you can learn about a multitude of subjects, and over time, you'll find yourself less and less fearful because knowledge has taken the place of the fear and the anxiety. People who have severe death anxiety may find cognitive behavioral therapy to be helpful. And I put in a link in our show notes just for you to learn about cognitive behavioral therapy because it's useful in a lot of situations. But in the case of death anxiety, there is a 6-step cognitive behavioral intervention for individuals dealing with death anxiety that can be done with a trained expert. And the first is exposure to fears. Identify what exactly it is that scares them about death, and whether there are any situations or places, such as funerals or cemeteries, that they tend to avoid so as not to trigger their fear. Like, I was talking about, we've been watching that Joan Woodward, Paul Newman thing, and so we watched The Three Faces of Eve the other night. And if you guys haven't seen that,
right,
it's really well done. Joanne Woodward won an Academy Award. But spoiler alert, her trauma, Eve's trauma, begins at a point where her mother forces her to kiss her dead grandmother on the cheek. Because her mother says, if you kiss her on the cheek, you won't miss her as much. And Eve, as a little girl, 6-year-old girl, screaming, don't make me, don't make me, don't make me. And she's very, very traumatized by that experience. The second step is reducing reassurance-seeking behavior. This step targets the individual's tendency to obsessively check their own body for alarming changes, to speak to people looking for emotional reassurance regarding death-related worries, and to have an abnormal reliance on health and emotional aids ranging from supplements to superstitious behavior. 3 is reviewing personal experiences. Review personal experiences with death, such as having witnessed the death of a loved one or being faced with their own or someone else's life-threatening diseases. 4 is switching focus to enjoying life. Identify your short, medium, and long-term goals to be able to focus on what they want to achieve in life and how best to enjoy their experiences rather than obsess over the fear of death. It's that idea that, if death were this cup of coffee that's been handed to you, you have a choice to drink it or to throw it on the floor. Death doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter to death. It doesn't matter the cup of coffee, what you do with it. It only matters to you. And so, choose to drink it. Don't throw it off. 5, developing a healthy lifestyle. Identify and address any consistent sources of stress for the person facing death anxiety or any other unhealthy aspects of their lifestyle that are potentially aggravating the fear. So you're fear dying of lung cancer, but you continue to smoke. Well, how about we address the fact that you're continuing to smoke because that's going to put you at continued risk of the thing that you fear. And lastly, preventing anxiety relapse. Even after initial successes in diminishing death anxiety through cognitive behavioral therapy, many people experience a relapse. To prevent this from happening, it's crucial to help everyone develop coping strategies for challenging situations that might re-trigger death anxiety, such as a sudden illness or an emotional crisis or having to go to a funeral. So planning ahead, knowing that this is something that you're afraid of, and saying, okay, so I have to be in this situation. How am I going to do it? How am I going to approach it? Make a plan, and then kind of stick to your plan. We scuba dive, and one of the things with scuba diving is that you make your plan and you follow your plan. Yeah. You don't, wing it when you're in 100 feet of water. You just don't. And I don't see why in our personal lives, we can't also say, okay, here's my plan. Now, it's not that you can't say, oh, well, it's raining today, so I can't do my plan. I'm going to do something else equally wonderful. It's just a matter of, here's how I'm going to manage things. Here's how I'm going to use my time. Here's how I'm going to channel my death anxiety more toward my life rather than worrying about death. Any thoughts about that, Charlie, or questions?
I mean, just what you just said about, you recognize something that makes you anxious or frightens you, you identify it, and just what you were saying, it doesn't go away, but the more you identify it, and if you want to use the analogy of, you're in the dark and people are afraid of the dark, so throw some light on that. Yeah, I mean, it's with most people, you will never get rid of that anxiety. But like you were saying, if you acknowledge it and see, oh yeah, this is what makes me uncomfortable. I know in my case, yeah, I mean, just for me personally with the, the grieving process, yeah, there are just some days, I still feel sad about, the death of my son. And so, yeah, if it hits me, it hits me. I don't live there, but it's the same with any anxiety. You're, over time, the level of anxiety will start to get less and less. But if you think it's going to go away 100%, I don't think so. But at least it doesn't, freeze you. It doesn't have the same impact that it would if you just didn't acknowledge it at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the other thing too, I've wondered, in the past podcasts, we've talked about how, I mean, literally for thousands of years, dying was just part of the process in people's, families and people's lives going back thousands of years. The concept of, in your village, people would die and those who remained living would take care of you. And it just seems to be a 20th century phenomenon where in the earliest 20th century, death was taken out of the house and the funeral industry started and all that. So that created a gap. You were no longer part of the process of someone dying, of taking care of a body, cleaning them, bathing them, dressing them, burying them. That's just not the case anymore on a mass level. Slowly, it's going back to that with a lot of people. But it's just that death was just taken away. So I think that has also added to the anxiety. And I don't know, sometimes I think it's more like a modern phenomena, a 20th century anxiety of that it's like, which was just made the idea of death fearful in so many people. But as you were saying, if you identify that fear, I've done a lot of death cafes, and the things that really came up, the two biggest things that came up was first, fear of the unknown. People just did not know what was going to happen once the lights were out permanently. And second, pain. People are afraid of dying in pain. And just, far better than I, no, this is the 21st century. You don't need to die in pain. There's enough, there's enough medication. But again, you need to prepare. You need to know this. And I think listening to our series about, how people die and what you can expect and what we in the business do or know how to do, it should bring some comfort to say, oh, there are people who are skilled in this. They know how to use the medicine if I want to have it, and that I have choices. Exactly.
If you want to be sedated, you can be, and if you want to be awake, you can be, and we work with you.
Yeah, and again, as an individual, you need to know what your limits are, what you want, and then as part of the preparation, to let those around you who will be there at the end, to let them know what you want. And sometimes that can be a pain in the butt because they may look at you like you're crazy and no, you can't die that way. You can't do that. No, it's about you. You prepare for what you want. You express your wishes. Yeah, and I'm sorry. Sometimes, even family members, if they're not going to follow through on your wishes, you need to find somebody who will speak for you.
Exactly. So the fear of death is a universal one for humans, and I think that the action that you're taking as our listeners in terms of listening to these shows is helping you. And if you think about it, are you more comfortable? Are you more able to talk with people about their choices or think about your own choices as you've gone through, educating yourself about the process of the end of life? And that's our hope for you.
Yeah. And again, look, think about what you need, what you want, what frightens you, what doesn't frighten you. And again, you please let other people know. Don't keep this to yourself. This is part of the preparation. Yeah.
Right. So what you got for our third half, Charles?
For our third half, we have Claire Lucky. Dear Claire.
We love Claire.
Yes. Also known as the Grieving Bitch on Instagram, she is part of the Everyone Dies correspondent team. At age 32 and only 5 months into her marriage, her husband Matt was diagnosed with stage 4 glioblastoma, which is brain cancer, in February 2020. Claire was his caregiver until his death in June of 2021. Claire shares her grief journey and life challenges as a 34-year-old widow living in New York City with Everyone Dies in her regular bi-monthly third half segment.
Hello, and I'm here once again with Claire Lucky, who is known on Instagram as the Grieving Bitch. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Marianne.
It's good to hear your voice. So we've been talking throughout the show about fear of death, and I was curious to hear what you had to say about if you remember, like, how you thought about death prior to Matt getting sick. Do you remember that?
I recall a time. A time when I had thoughts about death before Matt dying. And in my family growing up, it was kind of a dirty word. It was one of those cultures where if I even said, oh, well, so-and-so died or could die, my mom or my grandma would be like, don't say that. Now it's going to happen. It's almost like this superstition that if you just said the word death or dying, then it's like it's going to happen and it's going to be imminent.
So you could invoke death just by saying, it's like in Harry Potter, it's like he who shall not be named.
Yeah, exactly. He who shall not be named. So that was my first initial approach to death was just don't say it. It won't come to you or anybody you know. Mm-hmm. And then lo and behold, it does come to family members, friends, or other people we walk through this world with. So I did have some concept about it. And I didn't really take too much to Christianity or any type of organized religion. But I did get curious about past lives and more like Buddhist way of thinking. And I got into astrology. So I had this whole idea that, we're all part of the universe. And, there's this birth chart and there's numbers and there's signs. And I started to develop this like real romantic idea that, everything happens for a reason. And, if you're not here in this life, I'll see you in the next one type of thing. And I think you can tell in my tone of voice that I'm not so sure about that now. But that's what happened before Matt got sick. I was really exploring astrology and like really grasping to it's all in the numbers. And I have such a brain that's like, it's very based on logic, or it was.
And so did it change, or did your view change with Matt getting sick, or did it not change until he died?
It changed while Matt was getting sick. Matt was ahead of me in terms of accepting his death. We had lived with his diagnosis of stage 3 cancer for about 3 years before it was stage 4. And it was in that period where I was getting into astrology and past lives and future lives and things like that. But I still didn't think Matt was going to die I didn't think he was going to die before 60. And I think that was kind of framed by how his neuro-oncologist talked to us. Like, they did say verbatim, you guys are going to grow old together. So I didn't really think it was imminent until he had that seizure and until he got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And we did a lot of at least it's not glioblastoma leading up to that. Yeah. It's just, things are funny that way. And then when he got
they're funny, not funny, haha, but funny like, oh, Christ. Funny.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can't believe this. Like, looking back on, I can't believe my own thought process looking back on it.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, he got the diagnosis, and then we were, he's also he was very analytical and very logic driven, and he was atheist. So he just thought, well, that's it. I've got these months to live, and, this is what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to go by the best approach and get treatment. And, I've got maybe a year. So that was his attitude. And I slowly started to accept it. And I think once I accepted that he was going to die in, maybe a 2-year period, then I think I started to unlock a little bit and think, okay, well, I started to understand the fragility of life. And there was a mix of, just saying, trying to do what I could every single day to make it special. And then at the same time, I was waiting for his death. It was almost like I was tiptoeing and oh my God, is this it? If he drops something, I'm like, this is it. This is the sign. This is how he goes. So I think, I'm just reflecting on it now. I wonder, had I been educated about death before I was in a life and death scenario with my husband having a terminal illness, maybe that would have been an advantage to me instead of having to get used to stage 4 brain cancer, a global pandemic, losing my husband, and then understanding the fragility of life on top of it, and that, in fact, everybody does die.
That's like eating the whole buffet in one bite.
Yeah.
It really, it kind of is easier on our bodies if we just do one course at a time, which, I hope our listeners are kind of starting to, if they haven't already, see the logic and, learning about these things, since we're all going to do it.
100%. And then after he died, I really became comfortable with death. And I wonder if that's because somebody that I love dearly died, and I'm very fortunate for him. And one of my biggest things was making sure he was comfortable as he died, and that was accomplished. He was as comfortable as possible. Now that he went through that process, I feel safer about dying because the man I love is on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what's on the other side. I hope it's rainbows and gumdrops and, endless Prosecco. but I have no idea. And I think that's what makes life so beautiful, is we don't know what's over there. But I welcome death. I'm friends with it now. I understand it's going to happen to me. And I heard Jamie Lee Curtis say something really inspiring the other day, that she wants to die fully alive. And that means fully in her mind, fully in her body, capable of making decisions and capable of working towards her purpose and still having that spark. And then that's true for me in the way that if I'm not mentally or emotionally there, or if I'm, beyond the pale physically, like for me, if I can't enjoy a good meal, I think that might be it for me physically. Then I feel like just load me up with the drugs and send me upstairs to meet my husband.
Well, and, those are things that I guess, in many ways we can fantasize about how it would be or how great it would, to go one way or another. But again, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work like that, right? But we can hope, and we can hope that Jamie Lee Curtis gets it the way she wants it. And like, I would like to go to sleep and just, wake up and say, where the hell am I? But I don't know that that's going to go that way.
The other side that's happened since Matt's death and me getting more comfortable about death and not being afraid to die is if there's ever a situation, hope, knock on wood, this wouldn't happen. If there's ever an intruder in my house, or if somebody comes at me on the subway, I will fight to the death. I absolutely, I have that widow rage inside me, and I'm not afraid to be creative and use so many different things as weapons. So I do have this ridiculous, I'll fight anybody, because it's just inside me. And I just feel like a little lackadaisical.
It's like, you're so teeny. It's like the Chihuahua that can just bite you at your ankles and not let go.
Yeah, this 5'1" person is running around New York City ready to fight anyone at any given time.
It's just this picture that I have of you, Claire. Well, I think so. Do you think that it's Matt's dying that took you to a place of being comfortable with it, or do you think that it was processing it with Matt? If you had to sum up what brought you to a different place, what do you think it would be?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think we got comfortable with him dying together, and I was able to say things to him like, I don't know what's over there, but I want you to haunt me. I want you to give me signs and all that. And I think that helped us process it together. And his dying helped me understand life and death. But I wish it wasn't that way. I wish I had conceptualized it before he was even sick. And that would be that's the advice that I would give to our listeners, is you can conceptualize it when you're not in a crisis. And then by the time you get to a life and death scenario, you might have a frame of reference, or it could just all go haywire. But still, it might give you a shot of being a little comfortable. And it's inevitable. Nobody gets out of life alive.
That's right. And I think that from my experience, those people who have some preparation and some knowledge do go through it in a much less frantic, afraid, out of control way, because none of us likes to feel out of control. That's just not, comfortable or what we like. So the knowledge, the information that you can get helps you maintain some semblance of control in a situation that you don't control, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Anything that you can control when you're underwater is so helpful.
Right. Well, Claire Lucky, thank you for your thoughts and your always wise advice. And we look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.
Thanks, Marianne. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Claire. And that's it for this show. Please stay tuned for the continuing escapades of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. Like sand through an hourglass, so are the days of our lives. But not sandwiches through an hourglass. I mean, they're just too big. This is Charlie Navarrete, and in this time of folks ignoring ongoing mutations of COVID, death is a cure of all diseases.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember, every day is a gift. Thank you.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.